Our last speaker of the afternoon, Mr. Harry Pastuszek from Pyrexa Gold, who will talk about value chains for tomato in Nigeria. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Thank you very much. Actually, I just wanted to let everyone off the hook. If you were thinking you'll get a presentation on rigorous assessment methodologies, you could leave now. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I'm not kidding. There's not going to be a good deal about that. It's going to be a different look at the tomato value chain relative to the Nigerian context. Just a quick background on Caixeta Global. We're an organization that works primarily with private sector funders to do work. In my case, I run the enterprise and community development practice area. So we do a good deal of work with oil and gas companies for one, large agribusiness companies on the other, to develop value chains and try to find win-win solutions, right, for private sector and farmers and suppliers. So when we look at post-harvest loss relative to tomatoes in Nigeria, it's fairly similar to some of the work that I heard spoken about with citrus in Nigeria earlier today. It's the 14th largest producer of tomatoes in the world, first in sub-Saharan Africa, 1.5 million metric tons of annual production. As far as demand domestically, you've got 2.3 million metric tons that are demanded, right? And so you have a situation where there's a good deal of production, but you can't meet domestic demand, and in addition, more than 50% is lost. These are estimates, right, on post-harvest loss for tomatoes in Nigeria. And then finally, think about it in terms of the amount that is imported as processed, and you've got $360 million worth of tomato paste that's imported annually into Nigeria. So if you think about challenges, there's more or less a complete lack of in-country processing, okay? The second point on here, as far as poor infrastructure, was laid out in the last presentation quite precisely, right? Road infrastructure, in the case of Nigeria, I think takes a step back from that seen in the case of Brazil. Another big issue that's faced in the case of Nigeria has to do with, and this of course is not uncommon, but it's a matter of seasonal glut and an inconsistent year-round supply that's also met by inconsistencies in demand, right? And then readily available, cheaper imports from Benin, Togo. In the fresh case, you actually have a situation where in the south of Nigeria, it's a simpler matter to bring in produce from Benin and Togo than it is to get the domestically produced tomatoes to market from the north of the country. And then there is a significant lack of farmer aggregation. So you have a situation where the good news is success in improvements in this area are going to have direct impact on smallholder farmers, right? But the obstacles that have to be overcome require a good deal of work in aggregating farmers. And I just want to take a quick step back. The way that Caixeta Global is conducting this work is through the support of the Rockefeller Foundation. And what they've got us specifically trying to understand, right, is taking what is very much not an organization predicated on agricultural expertise, but one that is more comfortable working in the area of partnerships and market improvements to look for ways in which to motivate secondary markets, if you will, to assume the supply in this case. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that can work. right? So if we look, here's a quick, this is about as rigorous as the statistics get, okay? So when you look at value chain analysis, in the case of Nigerian tomatoes, you've got 30% of the loss occurring in transit to market, okay? And I've got some photos in a minute that'll make clear how that happens, right? And you've got 20% of the post-harvest loss happening due to a lack of demand, is how it's presented here, but it's an issue of seasonal glut, right? So you've got a crop that is ready for harvest at specific times, and those don't match up to the needs as far as demand goes. So when you get a view of where we're talking, right? I mean, this is the primary areas of production in Nigeria. You think of Kano, Bauchi, Plateau. These were the areas that we took a closer look at what is happening and how the loss is occurring. And then, of course, if you think about the difficulty in transport down to the southern region, it's fairly immense, and you'll get a notion why. I mean, personally, I actually think very highly of the idea of using a dirigible or a zeppelin to transport the tomato produce. In this case, I think it would make some progress in the case of Nigerian tomatoes. This gives you some insight as to what we're dealing with. I mean, the road condition in the upper left-hand picture is pretty typical of the roads as you head south. Okay, so in addition, in the case of Nigeria, if we go back to the map just briefly, if I can accomplish that, you've got in the north, the roads are actually fairly passable and useful, but you have a pretty tense security situation. Then as you head down to the areas of greatest demand, you end up with roads like on the upper left. The right-hand picture on the top is illustrative of the preferred truck for transport for farmers in the north. They prefer not to transport them in large lorries. They like the smaller vans. And then you've got the raffia baskets at the bottom. And I don't think I have to explain what the problem presented by a basket that holds roughly 80 kilos of tomatoes being transported in warm weather on rough roads in small vans, right? So after one use, the baskets are more or less of limited utility due to the amount of moisture that they've accumulated, but they're used multiple times over the course of a season. So this just gives you some insight to the transportation challenges that are faced. So what you note here, we're looking for a solution, right? In the case of this problem, we want market-driven solutions, if at all possible. So you have a situation where, as a nation, Nigeria is actually a large importer. It's not a small player when it comes to the amount of processed tomato paste that it imports. But due to a number of challenges and constraints, it has no domestic processing capability at the moment. So what one would typically, and certainly in this setting, refer to as a post-harvest loss problem, we're taking a look at it from it being a market access problem with post-harvest loss implications, for sure. So if you look along the left-hand side there, you get a range of issues that need to be addressed. But at the baseline, we feel pretty strongly that if we could motivate a private sector actor to set up processing capabilities in country and then work to address the secondary market issues that would arise, that we would have the potential for a solution. And I'm not really speaking, I'm sure, to many people in the audience. There is domestic capacity to process, very recently established by the Dangote conglomerate. And what is needed now is the farmer aggregation and the aspects of market improvement in agricultural sense that most people here will be quite familiar with. But what we want to avoid desperately is a situation where, okay, a large processing plant is available that would actually would take on roughly a third of annual production in the country at full output. Okay, so that's a great story, I think, right? But we don't want to have a situation akin to other interventions where a large anchor buyer, private sector player manages to increase the demand greatly, but in the end actually not have the positive impact on the loss statistics that one would hope. And I think we've seen in certain crops in certain locations with other anchor buyers a situation where there's a rush to market, right? The amount of supply spikes greatly once there's this opportunity to supply an operation that's going to process. And so what we're looking to do is to find those secondary outlets, whether they be hotels, catering companies, restaurants, supermarkets, et cetera, that would be able to be off-takers of the increased supply that should occur once the processing plant and the outgrower scheme that accompanies it goes fully online. Right, so what is this? Yes, there we go. As usual, I've talked ahead of my slides. That happens on occasion. But increased production rate doesn't always, it's never the key determinant for decreasing post-harvest loss. We've got to strengthen the market connections and all else that go with it. I can see I'm going to be right on time, I think. So with that, I'll turn it over for questions if anyone has any.
Yes, we have time for 2 questions. There's someone over here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Santori Chamley. I would just like to know a little bit more about how committed the Nigerian government is to addressing the issue, please.
Right. So I can't truly speak on behalf, right, of the Nigerian government, but with regard to what they've done in this particular market space, they certainly have established import restrictions. But what, as we've talked about in other situations, what's really needed are the solutions to the transport and logistics problem, I would say. And again, I really can't speak on behalf of the Nigerian government. We will be, in consultation with them as we progress with this program.
Him first and then Charlene.
And as part of the regional market protocol, you have what you call trade agreements in which you allow free flow, free movement of goods. Eh? So that when we're looking at import restriction as a measure, we got to look at it within the context of the trade agreements that have been signed. And what I'm saying, in the case of Nigeria with regards to tomatoes, etc., it may be that one may have to look at rationalizing where best it can grow that thing within the context of the trade agreement it have signed. Because, for example, in the Caribbean, for example, we have certain trade agreements. And even if I want my country to restrict a good, but at the same time, the other country would say, but then I can restrict your good coming into my country because we are part of a regional market. And so sometimes the planning process of post-harvest handling and losses and movement has to be looked at not only from a country point of view, but within the regional markets that they belong to.
No, I think that's a great point. And as I say, the transport and logistics issues in country are very much in control, I think, of the government, and so that's where the commitment would be most handy.
Hi, Beth Mitchum from the University of California, Davis. I'm curious if you have any information that would shed light on whether the economics of the situation you presented to us would indicate that the processor or any of these other outlets that stand to make some funds would have any skin in the game in terms of helping to improve the sector so that they can get the local supply that they need? Is it economically viable for them to do so?
So I think acting alone, a large group that goes into process might not have the profit-driven connection or the business case for improving the rest of the market. What we're hoping to do through this program, and with the support of the Rockefeller Foundation, right, is to try to take that space and do the work necessary to motivate the off-takers in a secondary market sense to improve the overall flow of things. At the issue of getting supply to the processing facility, then sure, there's a business case for the processor to take that on.
I'm going to give the last question to Charlene, because she had her hand up for a while.
Thank you very much. Charlene McCoyne from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And this is very similar to Beth's question, because you talked about motivating the private sector. And as someone who's always trying to figure out how do we do that, can you give us sort of a hierarchy of things that you think that would need to be done? And I know that this would be very contextual. In the case of Nigeria, clearly a large private sector processor is going to most likely want to buy down their risk, know that the government is willing to put in the infrastructure or something along those lines. And you said that your role is to play that middle sector, again, funded by a private foundation. So what do you think would be the best roadmap, let's call it that, for getting all of this done?
Right. In this case, we start with a big head start in the sense that the infrastructure, the kit necessary for the processing plant is in place, right? So that's a pretty big motivator, and it's been lying dormant for a little while as the certainty and surety and quality of supply is firmed up. So if you were to put a roadmap for this situation, generally it would have to begin with how to even motivate that kind of forward-looking and investment risk-taking on the part of the private sector. In this case, it exists, right? As far as the difficult part and the part we're working through right now is how to ensure, given all the challenges, right? So the processing plant has been located in a place that makes a lot of sense, given the supply. And actually the state of the roads is not that bad, and all the other challenges are manageable probably with an investment by the main company. The challenge will be in figuring a way to ensure supply at the right time to the smaller players, the secondary market players that we're most interested in. I use the word motivate, but it isn't really a matter even of motivating them. It's a matter of getting the product to them in such a way that they're no longer interested in the import varieties that are available, and doing it at a cost, right? That's manageable. So it'll be an exciting next little while we figure all that out. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So I have a couple announcements. I know we didn't have as much time for questions, and you all have questions. And from here, we'll be going to a networking and poster session. But I also have an announcement about how to get to dinner. The bus instructions are that the pickup is going to be at 7 p.m. and it's near the Manzoni metro stop. And the Manzoni metro stop is at the corner of Manzoni and Filiberto streets. So I actually have it all written down because my accent is terrible and I've probably mispronounced it, but you can come and see where the bus is going to pick us up because I guess it's a change from picking us up at hotels. So we'll be meeting at this metro stop at 7 p.m. to get to dinner. So with that, let's thank everybody for a wonderful session. And yes.